In late April of 1943, a captured German Tiger tank sat on a firing range outside Moscow. Soviet gunners had already thrown their best at it. The 76mm gun on the T-34, the gun that had beaten every German tank before this one, could not crack the Tiger's front plate at any range that mattered. So they rolled up a different weapon. It was tall. It stood on a wide cross of steel legs. By trade, it pointed at the sky. It was an anti-aircraft gun built to reach bombers 3 miles up. The crew cranked its long barrel down flat, laid the sights on the Tiger, and fired. The shell went clean through the front armour at 1,100 yards. The gun that fired that shell had been drawn up to kill airplanes, not to fight tanks at all. And inside of a year, the gun proven on that range would ride into Germany bolted onto the turret of the T-34-85. This is the story of the Soviet 85 that was made to guard the sky and ended up answering the tank nobody else could stop. The Soviets called it the 52K. Out in the field, men just called it the 85. It was a heavy anti-aircraft gun, adopted in 1939, drawn up under 2 designers named Mikhail Loginov and Grigory Dorokhin. Its whole reason to exist was altitude. German bombers flew high, and the Red Army needed steel that could reach them up there. And it could. The 85 threw its shell at close to 2,600 feet a second. It could put a round more than 34,000 feet into the air. That is over 6 miles straight up. A crew of 7 served it, and a trained crew could send up 10 to 12 rounds a minute. Rings of these guns stood around Moscow, around the oil, around the cities. They pointed at the clouds. Across the war, Soviet anti-aircraft crews claimed more than 4,000 Axis aircraft brought down, and a large share of that work belonged to the 85. None of that was about tanks. The gun was long, tall, and heavy. It rode on a 4-wheeled carriage and took time to set up. It threw a big shell, but so did a lot of guns. On paper, it was a machine for looking up, not out. That one detail is the whole trick of this story, so hold on to it. Because in the summer of 1942, a new problem crawled onto the Eastern Front, and it was not in the sky. The problem was the Tiger. When the German Tiger reached the front, it broke a belief the Red Army had leaned on for a year. The Soviets trusted the 76mm gun. It armed the T-34 and the heavy KV-1. It had punched through every German tank sent east so far, and Soviet command had told itself that gun would handle anything the Germans built. The Tiger proved them wrong. Its front armour ran close to 4 inches of solid steel. The 76mm shell, fired at any honest combat range, struck that plate and skipped off. Crews watched their rounds hit square and bounce. A tank they could not kill was now leading German attacks, and the standard answer in every Soviet turret no longer worked. That is a bad place for an army to be. You can be brave, and you can be many. None of it matters if your gun cannot open the enemy's tank. The Red Army needed a shell that would go through that plate, and it needed it fast. What it did not have yet was a clean look at the thing. You cannot design the cure for armor you have never measured. To beat the Tiger, the Soviets first had to catch one whole. The Tiger and these swamps already had a history. The Germans had first sent the Tiger into battle near a place called Gar, south of Leningrad, back in late August of 1942. It went badly. The battalion commander, a major named Richard Marker, had argued against it. He said the ground was all wrong for a 57-ton tank, forested and soft and full of bog. He was right. Of the 4 Tigers sent in, 3 broke down before they could do much of anything, and 2 sank into the mud. The newest, heaviest secret in the German army had made its debut by getting stuck. The crews had barely a week or 2 on the controls before they were rushed into the worst ground they could have picked. The swamp had humbled the Tiger once already. In January, it would do worse. It would hand one to the enemy whole. They caught it at Leningrad. By January of 1943, Leningrad had been under siege for more than a year. The city was starving. A ring of German guns and troops held it by the throat, and inside that ring, hundreds of thousands of civilians had already died of hunger and cold through the first terrible winter. The only lifeline was a supply route across the ice of a frozen lake. Breaking the ring by land was the single most wanted thing on the whole Soviet front. Men were ready to bleed for a corridor only a few miles wide, because on the far side of it, a city was slowly dying. In the middle of that month, the Red Army went for it. The operation was called Iskra, which means spark. The 67th Army pushed east across the frozen Neva River. The Volkhov front pushed the other way to meet them. The ground between was low, wet, cut with peat bogs, half swamp and half ice. On the 18th of January, the 2 armies linked hands. After more than a year, Leningrad had a land road to the rest of the country again. The corridor was narrow, only about 6 miles wide, and German shells still reached it, but it was open. The breakthrough did something else, and this is where the gun story turns. The German heavy tanks in that sector belonged to the 502nd Heavy Tank Battalion, one of the very first units to field the Tiger. The swamp was the worst place on earth to fight a 57-ton tank. As the line collapsed, one Tiger, marked 100, drove off the firm track and sank into a peat bog, stuck fast. The German crew knew what they were sitting in. A whole tank, the newest secret in the German arsenal, mired and helpless. They tried to destroy it before it could be taken. They worked to set demolition charges to blow the tank apart. They did not get the chance. Soviet infantry came on hard, drove the crew off their own tank, and climbed up onto it. Then they did something careful and deliberate. They pulled the German demolition charges off the tank and threw them clear, saving the very thing the Germans had tried to wreck. Local commanders sent up 5 T-60 light tanks from a tank brigade nearby to haul 57 tons of Tiger out of the bog under fire. The T-60 was a tiny scout tank. One of them next to a Tiger looked like a child next to a bull. But the Tiger had been left out of gear and would roll. The crews hooked tow cables from all 5 little tanks at once and dragged. They got it moving, dragged it far enough onto solid ground, and then a heavy KV-1 took over the tow and hauled the prize back behind Soviet lines. They had done it. 2 intact Tigers, 100 and other marked 121, went back off the Leningrad front and onto rail cars bound for a proving ground outside Moscow called Kubinka. The most feared tank on the Eastern Front was about to be measured, weighed and shot at by every gun the Soviets owned. At Kubinka, they put the Tiger on trial. In late April of 1943, Soviet engineers stood the captured Tiger up as a target and went down the line of guns looking for the one that could kill it. They measured its armour, plate by plate. They checked the front, the sides, the thick steel mantlet around the gun. Then they fired at it from marked distances and wrote down, for every gun the Red Army owned, the exact range at which it would and would not go through. The 76mm gun, the standard Soviet answer, failed the test just as it had failed in the field. The plate held. Then they brought up the heavy hitters. One was the 122mm A-19, a big core gun. The other was the 85mm anti-aircraft gun, the 52K, hauled off sky duty and pointed at a tank. The anti-aircraft gun did the job cleanly. Fired at the Tiger's front, the 85 punched through the armour at 1100 yards. Read that range again. Not point blank. Not a lucky side shot. The gun built to hit airplanes went straight through the front of the tank, nothing else could touch, from over half a mile away. The 122mm gun could crack it too, but it was enormous and slow. Everyone in the room could see the 85 was the practical answer. The reason was simple, and it was the same reason the gun could reach a bomber 6 miles up. To fight aircraft, you need speed. You need a shell that leaves the barrel fast and flat so it can chase a moving plane across the sky. That same flat, fast punch is exactly what cracks armour. The very quality that made the 52K a good sky gun made it a natural tank killer. The Soviets had been sitting on the answer to the Tiger for 4 years. It had just been pointed the wrong way. The Germans, of all people, already knew this trick. Their own most feared gun, the 88, was an anti-aircraft gun first. German crews had been dropping the barrel of the 88 to fire on tanks since the fighting in Spain. In the deserts of North Africa, the 88 became the terror of British armour, opening up tanks from more than a mile off. Take the heavy gun built to reach the sky, lower it, and let its fast, flat shell tear through armour. The 88 had been doing to Allied tanks for years what the 85 was about to do to the Tiger. Both sides, in the end, found their deadliest tank killer by looking up first. So they turned it around. The order went out to take the 85 gun and build it into a weapon a tank or a tank hunter could carry. 2 of the country's best gun designers were set against each other to do it. One was Fyodor Petrov, working at Artillery Factory No. 9 in Sverdlovsk, deep behind the Urals. The other was Vasily Grabin, the man behind half the Red Army's field guns, whose bureau finished its design under an engineer named Savin. They worked fast, because the front could not wait. Everyone knew the Tiger would not stay a handful of tanks in a swamp. That summer it was coming in force in the great tank battles the Germans were already planning. The The Red Army had a few months to turn a firing range result into steel its crews could shoot back with. Petrov's bureau built a gun called the D5, drawn straight from the ballistics of the anti-aircraft 85. In army trials in July of 1943, Petrov's gun won the contest for the new tank hunter. It became the main gun of the Su-85, a low tank destroyer built on the T-34 hull, whose only purpose was to sit, wait, and knock out German armour at range. The Su-85 reached the front in the autumn of 1943, only months after the Tiger had sat on the Kubinka range. The turn from a captured tank in a bog to a fielded answer had taken less than a year. For the first time, the Red Army had a hunter that could open a Tiger's front from far enough away to matter. The same gun family climbed onto the heavy tanks. A version of Petrov's D5 armed the new KV-85 and the first of the IS heavy tanks. And for the tank the whole army rode, the T-34, the winning design was the rival gun, the ZIS S-53 that came out of Grabin's shop. That gun turned the plain T-34 into the T-34-85. It reached the tank brigades in early 1944, and it was the tank that carried the Red Army across Poland and into the German capital. Every one of those guns traced its bloodline back to the tall anti-aircraft piece on the Kubinka range. And it went out in numbers that are hard to picture. The Soviets built more than 20,000 T-34-85s before the war ended, on top of the thousands of tank hunters and heavy tanks carrying the same family of gun. The ballistics first proven when an anti-aircraft shell cracked a captured Tiger's front would ride into battle in more than 20,000 turrets. One gun, built to guard the sky, ended up being the reason an entire tank fleet could finally fight the German heavies on even terms. The answer to the Tiger was a gun the Soviets had built in 1939 to shoot down planes. They had thousands of them already. The metal, the shell, the whole idea had been standing in the fields around their cities the entire time, aimed at the sky, waiting for someone to lower the barrel. It is tempting to picture rows of anti-aircraft guns dueling Tigers across the steppe. That is not the real story, and the record does not support it. The 52K stayed, first and last, an anti-aircraft gun. Its daily work was the sky, and it was good at it. Firing at tanks was an emergency job, the thing a crew did when German armour broke through and the 85 was the biggest gun in reach. When that happened, the gun was brutal. Picture it. A tall anti-aircraft gun, meant to stand well back and point at the clouds, suddenly hauled down level and laid flat along the ground. The crew of 7 working fast, sighting straight down the barrel at a tank a few hundred yards off, no time and no cover. It was a frightening job because the gun was big and the crew was exposed. But when that heavy shell hit, it went through. German tankers learned to respect a big flat shooting piece firing over open sights, and more than one German attack was stopped when an air defense battery lowered its guns and fired into the tanks instead of the sky. Still, this was the emergency, not the plan. The gun was never rebuilt into a purpose. Made tank destroyer sitting in the lime and pretending it was does the real story no favours. The gun's real victory over the Tiger was not won in a field duel. It was won on the firing range at Kubinka and then in the design bureaus of Sverdlovsk. The 52K beat the Tiger by handing over its barrel and its ballistics to the tanks and tank hunters that would do the fighting. It was the parent, not the soldier. And that is a bigger win than any single duel, because the child guns went on to fight in the thousands in every battle from Kursk to the German capital. Meanwhile, the 85 kept its first job to the very end. All through the war it stood in its rings around the cities and the columns, throwing shells 6 miles into the air at German bombers. The gun that fathered the T-34-85 never stopped being an anti-aircraft gun. It just turned out to be 2 weapons wearing 1 barrel. There is one last thing worth sitting with. The Germans built the Tiger to be the tank that could not be answered. Nearly 4 inches of front armour, a gun that outranged everything, a machine meant to make Soviet crews watch their shells bounce and lose heart. And the weapon that finally measured it, cracked it, and fathered the guns that would hunt it down was not a rival tank or a secret project. It was a gun the Soviets had spent 4 years pointing at the clouds. The Tiger was built to dominate the ground. In the end, the thing that opened it up had spent its whole life staring at the sky. The Soviets simply reached up, took the gun down off its air defense mount, turned it to face the horizon, and pointed the sky's own weapon straight at the tank that thought it was safe.